Hello, welcome to the channel Wise Stories. Enjoy watching.
"You're better off feeding pigeons in the park than going to the office party," her husband laughed. But when he saw his clueless wife sitting at the boss's table in the restaurant, he turned pale. Celestina was having a strange dream. A river gently rocked its waves along the shore, beckoning her, inviting her to bathe in its waters as if to cleanse herself from something impure. But Celestina knew she couldn't do that. The icy cold would paralyze her body instantly, dragging her to the bottom, leaving no chance to resurface. She had to stay away, or else she would lose her happiness, her joy, her beloved Estefan. In the dream, her homeland was sending her some sort of signs, but she couldn't decipher them. It was time to get up. Let the dream fade away along with the night. She'd quickly brew some coffee, whip up a fluffy omelet, and make a light salad. Estefan could sleep a little longer, her intellectual workaholic. There was no other way to describe him. There had always been a kind of mystical connection between her husband and his work. Celestina sometimes felt like he returned home enchanted, moving mechanically, with his thoughts far, far away. He was completely insane, her restless husband. He proposed to her half an hour after spotting her in the park feeding pigeons, their feathers ruffled by the first autumn chill. He'd spend hours in his lab, working on the next type of voice assistant. He couldn't even give a clear answer if he'd eaten that day or slept at all. Estefan was utterly obsessed with work. He'd vanish into it for days, seemingly impervious to fatigue. He survived mostly on copious amounts of coffee and energy drinks. Celestina fought this battle relentlessly. She prepared hearty meals loaded with calories, frequently changed the bedsheets, picked out comfortable pillows and warm blankets, and tried to be there for him at all times. But it was all in vain. They had been together for over a year, but nothing had changed. They were only truly together at night. That was when Estefan came alive, shaking off the workaholic spell for a brief moment, but soon he'd fall asleep again, only to wake up just as bewitched as before. Celestina felt as if her husband's voice was starting to sound mechanical, just like all his intellectual toys. She spent entire days alone at home, with her outings limited to the nearby supermarket. The only friend she had was a former classmate, someone she had known since childhood. This friend was the reason Celestina had mustered the courage to leave everything behind and move to the capital, into the great unknown. Her friend had gone through a tough journey herself, from a university student in the city to a successful woman with a solid career, and not just anywhere, but at the same company where Celestina's husband worked. For Celestina, however, things hadn't worked out so well. She was tired of playing the role of the sweet, submissive wife under her husband's protective shadow, but there was no talking about it. Estefan was deaf, mute, and blind when it came to her needs. Although he earned a good salary, he was against her finding a job in the city. The city still felt foreign and confusing to her after spending her childhood and youth elsewhere. She had once gotten lost in the subway and would quickly turn away if passers-by bumped into her or were rude. She conceded in everything related to confrontation, but could easily find her way in even the largest parks, as if she knew every inch of them. When she was close to nature, somewhere outside the city, Celestina came alive. Every living creature, from ladybugs to prickly hedgehogs, would quickly make contact with her. Estefan sometimes joked that even the trees seemed to bow to her. Celestina's father was a career military man. Before she was born, he and her mother had moved from city to city. Later, he served near a village. In that area, wild nature ruled, and the people were different too, as if they always had one foot in the past. Then her father, a skilled specialist, received an assignment abroad. At the age of 15, Celestina was left alone. That's how it happened. The young woman remembered the day she met Estefan. At that point, she had only lived in the capital for a week. Everything seemed to align for her move. Her only close friend had persistently invited her to visit, or even to stay permanently. And a longtime friend of her father's had left for a contract in hot Africa, leaving his apartment at her full disposal. He had even suggested she might want to continue her studies or find a job she enjoyed. Celestina had spent several years working in the legendary Central Library. It was no joke, the institution ranked second in the world in terms of its vast collection of printed works. After living in a boarding school and later in a college dormitory, working in the library felt like paradise to her. She still had her parents' small service house, so she didn't feel the overwhelming loneliness there. Books became her friends. They could captivate her, pull her away from reality, and make her feel lighter at heart. The years flew by without her noticing, and Celestina had grown accustomed to her fate, accepting it. Her parents were stationed very far away and couldn't return home until their contract was up. That's the nature of military service. But they desperately wanted their daughter to leave the countryside. They wanted her to learn to live among people, not just among books, nature, wild animals, and birds. They wanted her to adjust to city life. She couldn't remain single forever, they thought. After all, she was already over 25, with no child or even a pet to care for. Celestina, however, was far from being naive, inexperienced, or foolish in matters of life. Contrary to assumptions that she was destined to become an old maid, she had even had romantic experience. Though her brief affair had been with a married man, Celestina felt a certain gratitude toward him. He had been on a work assignment, visiting for some business of his own. He courted her with elegance, gifting her small tokens to remember him by. When he left, Celestina felt no bitterness or regret. People often say that everyone comes into our lives to play a role, and if that role is positive, then it's a gift. Her suitor had been gentle and attentive, leaving no harm in his wake. It seemed that this was the way things were meant to be. Celestina had almost forgotten him within a couple of months, but she gained a new sense of confidence in her womanhood. Whenever she looked in the mirror, she saw a woman of average height and build, with everything a woman was supposed to have. Her appearance wasn't striking, but she was pleasant looking. She was soft-spoken, warm, and kind in conversation. For her parents, leaving her behind had been an agonizing decision. Obeying orders meant separating from their beloved child. But the doctors had been clear, where her father was to serve, the overseas climate would have been harmful to her health. And so, Celestina stayed behind to continue her education at the boarding school, visiting home on weekends whenever she could. She hadn't even noticed how nearly 10 years of her youth had flown by, like a fleeting flap of wings, leaving her behind. Then, the capital beckoned, calling her. Celestina decided to take the risk. Love quickly found her, unexpectedly falling into her life. The day fate brought them together, Estefan felt an urgent need for a reset. His colleague, the very same friend of Celestina, suggested, "You need to go to the park, hug a tree, and recharge. You look exhausted. A couple of hours away from work won't make a difference for us." He had already wandered near the alley, admiring the golden beauty of autumn and even feeling a bit cold, when suddenly he noticed a peculiar girl in the distance. She was feeding pigeons with crumbs from a loaf of white bread, whispering something to them. Estefan smiled. What a quirky person, like someone from another world. I should go talk to her, have some fun, get to know her. She clearly didn't belong in the bustling streets of the capital. Where had this wonder been brought from? What distant province had she come from? Hearing his footsteps, the stranger turned around and said right away, "In your case, it would have been better to hug an oak tree. It does a better job of clearing the mind for its followers." But where would you find one? Estefan immediately realized she had witnessed him confiding his exhaustion to the birches. He gave her a sheepish smile and extended his hand. "I'm Estefan, and what's your name, wonderful creature?" She wasn't embarrassed in the least. She calmly extended her firm hand and replied, "I'm Celestina, and I'm not joking about the oak tree's healing powers." They started talking effortlessly, as if they'd known each other for years. Celestina spoke with a slightly unusual cadence, almost as if she were singing. And then Estefan suddenly realized that he could spend his entire life with her. The feeling was so intense that he gave his head a sharp shake, trying to dispel the strange notion. He had never had time for romance, but before he could even think it through, he blurted out, Celestina, marry me. I've always been looking for someone like you, and today, I finally found you." Celestina burst out laughing, genuinely amused. "You've got quite the sense of humor, young man. Or is that how marriage proposals happen in the capital in this fast-paced world? Not in the heavens, but in parks?" Their conversation was suddenly interrupted by Celestina's friend, the same one who worked with Estefan at the same company and had sent him outside to get some fresh air. "Estefan, they've been looking for you. Good thing the park is nearby. There's some urgent meeting with the boss. You were personally invited as the head of our department. Hurry, I told them you'd only be gone for 5 minutes. Oh, and I see you've already met my friend Celestina? She's the one waiting for me. We're heading to a cafe after work. Celestina, I'll be free soon, don't go without me. We'll grab a coffee. But now, we've got to run." Rattling this off quickly, Aracelia grabbed Estefan's hand and dragged him along. "Isn't my friend awesome, Estefan? She's nothing like all those capital city girls, completely different. Want her phone number? You should take a walk together, take a break from your project before you turn into a shriveled mushroom, all dried out without oxygen or joy." Aracelia, having settled into city life with ease, had a close and formal relationship with their boss and was considered his right hand. Estefan took Celestina's number from her right then and there, not expecting that he'd soon be calling this slightly odd, wild-spirited girl. He always felt incredibly comfortable with her. Every interaction with her left him feeling as if he'd just drunk cool, pure water from a healing spring on a scorching summer day. Somehow, without any planning, they grew close, and soon they decided to get married. Estefan had long grown tired of handling household matters on his own, and now everything seemed to be within reach. Celestina wasn't just a wife, she was a true find. When asked by his parents if he loved his future wife, Estefan answered affirmatively. His always busy parents never interfered in his personal affairs. Estefan's mother especially liked that her future daughter-in-law wasn't spoiled and didn't demand the stars from the sky. Celestina didn't care for expensive cars, shiny jewels, furs, fancy restaurants, or seaside resorts. But Estefan was now always well cared for, well-fed, and content. Celestina expertly flipped the omelet, waiting for the other side to form a golden, crispy crust, and then went to wake up Estefan. "Darling, time to get up. You still have to drive through all that traffic across the city." Her husband stretched, clutching the blanket and pulling it closer, but then glanced at the clock and came to his senses. "So much to do today." After a hearty breakfast, he announced, "Don't wait up for me tonight. We submitted the project, so there'll be a big celebration at the restaurant with an entertainment program." Celestina froze for a moment. "But Aracelia told me that your boss always invites the spouses to these corporate events. I'd like to come with you, just to take a break from the daily routine." Estefan was taken aback and stood still, staring at her in disbelief. "Celestina, have you lost your mind? You, and my company? Don't make me laugh. Your place is in the park, feeding pigeons with fresh bread and chatting with squirrels. You'd be bored at the party, too much noise, unfamiliar people, and pointless conversations." Celestina stepped back, deciding not to push the issue. But Estefan didn't know how stubborn she could be. After seeing him off, she immediately called Aracelia, her loyal friend who never let her down. "Aracelia, I heard your company is celebrating its success tonight at a restaurant. Estefan didn't want to take me with him." Her friend instantly voiced her indignation. "What? That's absurd. I'm going with my boyfriend, and no one's stopping us. You know what? We'll swing by and pick you up. Let's surprise your husband. Do you have something suitable to wear, or should I bring over my cocktail dress? I've got a brand new one that no one at work has seen yet. But better yet, find something from your wardrobe. Maybe that blue jersey dress or the light pantsuit you wore to my birthday party." They discussed outfits and hairstyles a bit longer before deciding to make a dramatic late entrance to the corporate ball. Jokingly, they compared it to Cinderella charming the prince and the king with just one glance. But Celestina didn't need to win over a prince, so her task was much easier. All that was left was to relax, enjoy herself, and have fun. After rummaging through her closet, Celestina decided on a sleek navy dress and high-heeled pumps. The outfit perfectly complemented her gray eyes and soft, wavy hair. It wasn't flashy, but it exuded quiet elegance. To avoid looking too formal, she added a delicate pearl necklace, a keepsake from the business traveler who had left it as a parting gift. Aracelia and her boyfriend didn't take long to arrive. They reached the corporate party almost on time. The gathering appeared fairly standard, an energized crowd already warmed up by drinks, women in evening gowns, and men in suits and ties, still maintaining their businesslike polish. Estefan, the head of one of the leading departments and Celestina's husband, was nowhere to be seen. As soon as they entered, Aracelia was called over by some colleagues, leaving Celestina momentarily alone. She picked up a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and sat down on a soft leather couch in a quiet corner. The restaurant was filled with exotic plants in large pots, and Celestina positioned herself behind one of the palm trees. She enjoyed observing people but wasn't used to being the center of attention. Suddenly, an imposing man in his mid-40s took the stage and was handed a microphone. He addressed the crowd. "Dear friends, today we're celebrating yet another one of our small victories. It's these kinds of successes that build the foundation of all the work we do as a close-knit company. I'm deeply grateful for your hard work, your dedication to our shared, challenging, but incredibly fascinating mission that holds the future of humanity in its hands. But for now, relax, enjoy yourselves, and unwind. I'm not one for long speeches or pompous monologues, so I'll end my remarks here." From the silence that settled over the room and the attentiveness with which the man was listened to, Celestina deduced that this was none other than Estefan and Aracelia's boss, Videl Reynoso. She had heard a lot about him, but now she tried to form her own opinion. According to her husband and Aracelia, Videl had achieved everything in life on his own. The thriving company was entirely his creation. She had also overheard that Videl's dedication to his work had not sat well with his wife, who had eventually run off with a lover. Initially, it was supposed to be a made-up vacation to escape boredom, but she never returned. Now Videl was raising their teenage daughter alone. Celestina's thoughts drifted to her spiritual mentor, the monk Gerald, who lived in Adatsan. She remembered their lessons vividly. It was Gerald whom her father had once saved in the forest. During her time at the boarding school and later at college, Celestina would always hurry to visit him during holidays. Gerald had never tried to convert her to his faith, telling her that this wasn't her path. However, he freely shared his wisdom with her. "You're a bright girl," he'd said, "and one day my teachings will bring you happiness." Here in the capital, she had yet to use the skills he had taught her. It could even be said that she had almost forgotten about them, including the way Gerald had taught her to read thoughts, not in a literal sense, but by observing people's gestures, facial expressions, and body language. She hadn't practiced this with her husband, trusting him as much as she trusted herself. As Celestina sat quietly, a man sat down next to her on the couch, holding his phone. The music in the room was loud, and she couldn't hear what he was saying, so she instinctively tried to read his lips, another skill Gerald had taught her. The man's energy radiated a sense of anxiety so intense that Celestina almost felt it herself, as if a jolt of electricity was running through her. She focused on him more closely. Could this person need help? And if so, am I the one who could offer it? At that moment, the man spoke into the phone, his voice laced with concern. "Don't cry, my little bird. I'm going to drop everything and come right away. Your mother will be fine. Let the doctors take her to the hospital, and you stay home. I'll be there soon." Celestina instinctively moved toward one of her husband's colleagues, whose face betrayed sheer confusion. As far as she knew, no outsiders were present at this party, so she decided to offer her help directly. "Excuse me, I overheard part of your conversation," Celestina began cautiously. "Is there something I can help you with?" The man looked at her with wild eyes, clearly on edge. Nonsense, there's no way you could have heard my conversation. Did my wife send you? She's spying on me, isn't she? Who are you? I'm Estefan Mosqueda's wife, Celestina calmly replied, trying to diffuse his panic. You don't realize it, but you're radiating anxiety and distress. I don't know your wife. Please, tell me how I can help. The man hesitated for a moment, his mind racing, but perhaps he had no other choice but to confide in her. I have a second family, he admitted, his voice barely audible. It's complicated. I've had another family for years. There are reasons, very serious ones, why I can't divorce my official wife, even though we've only been keeping up appearances for a long time. My second wife is gravely ill, cancer, and right now I need to leave to take my daughter somewhere. But it has to be discreet, so my first wife doesn't find out. My second wife is going to the hospital soon. She's in too much pain and just wants to pass peacefully under sedation. A solution came to Celestina instantly. I have an empty apartment here in the city, she said without hesitation. There's an elderly woman who lives nearby, a retired teacher who sometimes works as a nanny. We still keep in touch occasionally. In fact, she just called me yesterday, complaining that her current job ended when the family she worked for moved abroad. She's available now. Without waiting for his response, Celestina quickly dialed her former neighbor. The conversation was brief, and within minutes, she handed the man a set of keys and gave him the address. The nanny, despite usually avoiding working in her own home, agreed to care for his daughter without hesitation. Back when Celestina lived nearby, the woman often visited her for coffee and always enjoyed helping out. He felt she could trust this experienced woman. She didn't know what the distressed man had said to his companion at the banquet, only that he quickly disappeared, smiling warmly and waving goodbye. Her husband was nowhere to be found, but that didn't bother Celestina at all. She hadn't been around people in so long that she was enjoying every moment and felt pleased to have helped a stranger. Feeling comfortable, Celestina decided to quietly stroll around the hall. Perhaps the glass of champagne she had drunk had given her a bit of courage. Grabbing a small chocolate pastry from the buffet table, she looked around for Aracelia or Estefan. Once again, she didn't see any familiar faces, except for a few steps away where her husband's boss was talking to another man. Celestina tuned into her inner feelings, recalling Gerald's teachings, and sensed that she could read what Estefan's boss was currently thinking. Videl was in doubt about what his companion had said. She sensed his contemplation. I hardly know this new, still potential partner. His proposal could lead to a breakthrough for my company, or it could destroy it if it fails. What should I do? Whether it was exactly that or not, Celestina was confident that the host of the evening was pondering something along those lines. Meanwhile, his companion immediately put her at ease. He was thinking about his beloved dog, missing it, and dreaming of being home to hug his pet. Putting two and two together, Celestina realized at that moment that Videl could rely on this man as a business partner. Moreover, they would likely become friends over time. Both were lonely, both were not very happy in their personal lives, one devoted entirely to his daughter and the other to his pet. People like this tended to be decent and loyal, no matter how naive such conclusions might sound. At that moment, Celestina was guided by her intuition and a bit of the monk's teachings. She was sure she wasn't mistaken in her judgment. Meanwhile, Videl and his counterpart had moved to one of the tables, and Celestina hurried after them. Her next actions could easily be seen as the antics of someone a bit out of touch with reality. In high society, especially in the business world, such behavior was definitely not acceptable. On her way, she grabbed another glass of champagne from a passing waiter's tray. Without permission, she sat down at the table with the two men continuing their conversation, gesturing for them to stop. Both fell silent in complete astonishment. Celestina immediately preempted the question that was about to escape Videl's lips. No, I'm in my right mind, I haven't had that much to drink, and I'm thinking clearly. Videl froze, a thought flashing through his mind. This woman has read my thoughts directly. I wonder what she's planning. I think I should listen to her. Celestina wasn't particularly familiar with the rules of business etiquette. She barreled in without fear. She didn't even notice that curious guests had started gathering around their table. At that moment, she didn't care at all. Grabbing Videl's hand excitedly, she spoke fervently. You both won't regret this deal. It will completely change your lives and the standing of your firms in the market. Videl, he will never let you down. Cast aside all doubts. And you, forgive me, I don't know your name, you love your dog so much that you simply cannot be a bad person or an unscrupulous partner. Our attitude toward our lesser brothers is like a litmus test. It immediately shows whether one should walk through life with a person or if they will let you down halfway. A grave silence hung around the table. No one in the company knew anything yet about their boss's business plans, new projects, or prospects. Videl's eyes widened in shock, while his companion was unfazed. He shook Celestina's hand and said, We will definitely take your advice into account, dear creature, and I am flattered by your assessment of my humble self. To solidify our soulful bond, let's go dance, charming lady. Will you accompany me? The last thing Celestina saw as she stood up from the table was her husband Estefan's astonished eyes. Next to him stood Aracelia, who also looked like a statue frozen in fear. But Celestina didn't regret anything. She had done what she felt she must. Follow the impulses of your soul, my child. Gerald had told her. And she believed in her teacher's wisdom. During the dance, the man asked Celestina, How did you know that my dog is my best friend? My soul, my joy. Celestina smiled. It's actually quite simple. Anyone would understand what's on your mind if they remembered a scene from the series Best Friend. You love that series? I adore it. Sometimes I feel like I know it by heart. Luckily, it's constantly being shown on some television channel. I spend a lot of time alone at home, so I have time to watch it again. Anyway, remember the scene where the two main characters meet? One of them immediately guessed by the characteristic gestures that the other was eagerly waiting to see his beloved dog. You also brushed your hand through the air a few times, as if petting a large dog while talking to Videl. Anyone would understand what you were dreaming about at that moment if they took the time to decipher it. Celestina danced, completely unaware of her surroundings. She didn't see that her husband was approaching the boss, that Estefan was fuming with anger, dissatisfied and upset. Videl, on the other hand, was watching her with unabashed interest. He knew that his employees were somewhat wary of him, yet here was this woman, brimming with spirit, courage, and such spontaneity. Truly, this woman was an extraordinary creation. If only he knew who she really was. He soon got the answer to his question. Estefan interrupted his thoughts, appearing before him and asking permission to join the table. Videl, I apologize for my wife. I don't understand what came over her. She behaved at the very least tactlessly and shamelessly. It won't happen again. And at that moment, something inexplicable happened. Videl felt a sharp pang in his chest. This woman was married, and to a man who, although talented, was also overly ambitious and soulless. What a frustrating annoyance. This young careerist didn't even realize the treasure he possessed. Videl's mood suddenly soured. He wanted nothing more than to disappear from the party. It was a pity that, like the host, he couldn't leave the banquet first. He looked at Estefan as if he were something new and unexplored. For the first time, he felt a sense of contempt toward him, but he calmed himself aloud. Take it easy, Estefan. Your wife didn't do anything terrible. I respect people for their courage, their ability to be themselves, to speak openly without fearing the consequences. Celestina's husband left, but the bitter taste of the encounter lingered in his soul. At home, he would give his wife a piece of his mind for daring to show up at this corporate event and embarrass him in front of his colleagues. Everyone was whispering about her antics. The men were asking her to dance and trying to flirt. He just wanted it all to end. Estefan's mood plummeted to rock bottom. For the first time, he regretted thoughtlessly marrying such an ill-mannered wild woman. After the sparkling corporate party, Celestina was not forgotten in her husband's company. The commercial director she helped during the evening successfully arranged for his daughter to be cared for by the loving nanny in the apartment Celestina had lent him. Videl signed the fateful contract with the dog lover without any doubts. When they had a drink of cognac in his office to toast the success of the deal, both, without discussing it, remembered Celestina. I think this woman has a magic touch, even though I've never relied on such almost mystical things. Her blessing felt like some kind of fortune-telling. I just believed her unconditionally right away, said Videl, his new partner. I'm absolutely sure our business will soon take off. That evening, on the day of the corporate party, Estefan created a huge scandal at home. He got so worked up that he even wanted to slap her. She anticipated him and read his thoughts, deflecting his hand. Just try it. I will never allow you to hit me. And I'm tired of your ways, which resemble medieval family customs. I don't want to sit at home anymore. I will look for a job, meet new people, live my own life. And you won't stop me. This was their first major argument. They went to bed in separate rooms. Neither of them even thought about making up. A murky residue of mutual misunderstanding lingered in their hearts. Estefan completely immersed himself in work the next morning. Celestina went to visit the old lady who was taking care of her husband's colleague's daughter. Of course, Estefan didn't hear anything about the contract with that man. Family crises are commonplace. A couple of days after the party, Estefan and Celestina were almost reconciled. The word almost, unfortunately, was quite appropriate here. Both of them pretended that nothing had happened, but they had emerged from this situation changed. A clear crack had formed in their relationship, which they both were trying not to notice for now. Celestina began to visit her apartment more frequently. She really liked Alice. Sometimes she would take her out for long walks in the parks. Soon, they also became friends with Alice's father, Ramon. The man was so grateful to Celestina for this enormous help that he didn't know how to treat her and his daughter. The girl's mother had been placed in a medically induced coma. Ramon hid the reality from his daughter, but Celestina was able to sense and understand the girl's thoughts. Alice knew that her mother was dying. She was still unable to push away dark thoughts, and often her face reflected the struggle between sorrow and the thirst for life. Celestina tried her best to distract her. Ramon's thoughts had also changed. He was no longer afraid of the consequences of divorcing his official wife. He was tired of lying to her, of leading a double life. The only reason he wasn't rushing events was that he believed his beloved woman, despite the terrible prognosis, would feel better, that there would at least be a period of remission, and they could still be together. Celestina's heart ached in her chest as she observed all of this. The monk Gerald once told her that in grief, we are always alone. Everyone is destined for the same fate. Relatives, acquaintances, and friends stay with us for a time. They help and support us, but the remaining part of grief must be endured alone, without witnesses or helpers. Now, Celestina often practiced her abilities and skills. She tried to read people, to learn about their sorrows, and to help them. She reconciled an elderly teacher with her daughter. They hadn't maintained a relationship for a long time because they disagreed on the younger woman's romance with a married man. The nanny was strict in her moral principles and condemned her daughter for leading a man away from his family, suffering afterward from her adherence to high ideals. At one point, Celestina saw a woman in the yard who was gazing longingly at the windows of the teacher's house, moving her lips. Celestina read, "Mommy, I miss you so much. Your grandson is growing up, and you've never seen him. Open your heart to me again. I miss you dearly." Once again, Celestina was filled with determination. She ran up to the woman, grabbed her hand, and pulled her along. "Your mother isn't behind those windows you're looking at. Come with me, I'll show you where she is." The women reconciled, and Celestina was filled with joy and happiness about this. However, she found that her feet no longer carried her home to Estefan. She had settled into the capital. The city no longer seemed so foreign and ruthless to her. Now, she and Alice visited not just parks and squares, but also conquered movie theaters, exhibitions, memorials, and entertainment complexes. Ramon spared no expense for these outings and often told Celestina, "You are a true angel in flesh. God himself has sent you to me." Celestina's relationship with her husband had grown cold. He no longer asked where she had been all day. It was strange, she just now remembered what the old monk had told her. He warned her during their lessons that she could only penetrate the souls of those people who were not entirely indifferent to her, but also did not dwell in her heart along with love. She could never read Estefan before, but now she clearly sensed that he no longer loved her, not at all. In truth, he had never really loved her. She had been convenient to him in every way, as a mistress and as a servant, but not as his soul. Celestina's feelings for Estefan were fading more and more. She understood that their hasty marriage had been a mistake. They had rushed and acted impulsively. That marital bond needed to be untied. And if it couldn't be done gently, then it would have to be cut. She felt an agonizing pull toward her small hometown. Coincidentally, Aracelia's vacation was coming up, and the friends decided to fly back to their hometown for a couple of days. Both had people to see there. While they were on the plane, Celestina kept thinking, "Estefan let me go so easily, even with pleasure. If this separation shows that it's time to put a period in our relationship, I won't mind. When Aracelia and I return to the capital, I'll move back into my father's friend's apartment. He won't be returning there anytime soon. I'll help Ramon with the girl and find a job. But first, I'll consult with my teacher. What will he say about this?" The city greeted its visitors warmly. Aracelia rushed straight to her parents, while Celestina burned with impatience to see Gerald as soon as possible. The 30 kilometers from the monastery felt like an eternity to her. The old man was very glad to see her. He embraced her, then pulled back, shaking his head. "You're wearing a wedding ring, yet I don't see love in your eyes. But I won't ask anything. If you want to share, you will. We have some good news here. Funding for the reconstruction of our temple has increased. Soon everything will be restored. Pilgrims will come again, and we'll continue to teach the local kids our traditions." Their conversation was suddenly interrupted by the ringing of Celestina's cell phone. The connection was poor, so she stepped outside to hear better. It was Ramon searching for her. "Celestina, there's trouble at the company. The boss was hit by a car. The doctors are fighting for his life, and he keeps calling for you in delirium. I don't know what to do about it. Estefan said you flew back home. Everyone is endlessly surprised that the accident victim keeps repeating your name. The doctors advised finding the woman whom our Videl needs so much. In his critical condition, anything could help him survive." Gerald did not try to stop or dissuade Celestina from urgently flying back to the capital. He was old and quite wise, able to foresee the future of people. He kissed her on the crown of her head and simply blessed her. "Go, daughter. A person's life depends on you now. And take care of yourself. You are unique. Don't believe anyone who says otherwise." Celestina hitchhiked for almost 200 kilometers. Videl's face constantly loomed before her eyes, and she prayed for him as best she could. In the capital, for the first time, she did not want to go home. She went to the apartment where she lived with Alice's nanny. She now knew for sure that once she dealt with this trouble, she would file for divorce from Estefan. For some reason, it had become unpleasant for her to think about her husband. The only thing that bothered her was that she had left without warning Aracelia, but she knew her friend would understand. On the way, Celestina found herself reflecting for the first time on the fact that she could not read her childhood friend either. This indicated only one thing: she loved Aracelia with all her heart and knew it was mutual, which meant that Aracelia would understand her sudden departure correctly. That was why she couldn't read her friend's thoughts. How strange this teaching was arranged. Ramon didn't ask Celestina any unnecessary questions about why she hadn't gone home or why she hadn't informed her husband of her return. After Celestina had helped him so much, they had become friends, and he was ready to help her in every possible way. They went to the hospital as soon as she changed her clothes. There, Ramon led her to the door of the intensive care unit and informed the doctors that she was the Celestina whom their critically ill patient had been deliriously calling for. The surgeon explained, "We can't understand why he doesn't want to fight. Come with me. Occasionally, he regains consciousness, sees you, and maybe something in his behavior will change." Celestina understood nothing. Why her? What does Videl want from her? But her usual readiness to help quickly overcame all her questions. Aracelia's boss and Ramon were both sympathetic and respectful toward her. She would do everything within her power. Videl was infinitely tired. He felt this during the height of new developments in the company, at the moment when his active involvement was more crucial than ever. Yet he felt as if he had burned out. Something inside him had broken and ached. He still couldn't forget the moment when Celestina had grabbed his hand at the party. A stranger's wife, an unfamiliar woman, had stirred a storm of emotions within him. He didn't know how to name his feelings, but he wanted Celestina to greet him after work at his home and to give him a son. Wild dreams, unattainable. He had grown irritated with Estefan. Videl couldn't understand whether it was treacherous jealousy playing tricks on him, or if he had always known that this subordinate of his had something rotten about him. Estefan seemed diligent, but he always behaved a bit nervously. He pulled the covers over himself, not allowing other laboratory employees to express themselves either. Smart, but soulless. Videl had never made baseless judgments, but he recalled how Estefan had sneered at a new colleague who couldn't quite grasp how to operate the rather complicated coffee machine. The coffee machine wouldn't obey her for any amount of bribery, and Estefan commented in front of everyone. "What, have coffee machines not reached every village home yet? You came to the capital to learn how to use them." On another occasion, Videl witnessed yet another disgraceful scene. One of the subordinates had lost his mother, and everyone was gathering money to support him, to help in any way they could, while Estefan sneered in disgust. "You already don't know where to hide from all these freeloaders. Does he not have enough money for a funeral? Our salaries here are quite decent." It was obvious he didn't grasp that in the depths of sorrow, a person needed any kind of moral support. Everyone offered it in the most familiar, simplest way. Nothing new had yet been invented. What connected Estefan and his wife? This question tormented Videl deeply. He felt with every fiber of his being that these two were not a couple, but he couldn't explain his verdict. His heart told him otherwise, and it also insisted. "You're wrong to think that the 16-year age difference between you and Celestina is a chasm. They have no children, and her marriage is questionable. This is not a figment of your imagination, it's a fact. Fight for her. You feel in your soul that she is your woman, just her touch sends electricity through you." Videl pushed all these thoughts away, but it was useless. Celestina, like a thorn, sharp yet very beloved, had lodged herself in his heart. And there was no escape from it. He was endlessly astonished by Ramon's story, with whom he had become close friends, about how Celestina had helped him with his daughter. This woman knew how to surprise. Videl became increasingly immersed in dreams about her, until it reached the point where he fell into a kind of apathy. He had no chance to see Celestina, and he missed her terribly. He didn't even expect such passion from himself. All his casual affairs had become uninteresting. The only thing that saved him was spending time with his daughter, but she also began to notice that her father was often lost in sad thoughts. Something had to be done about it. Videl learned by chance that Celestina had left the capital for some personal matters. It was Ramon again who told him, and now he eagerly spoke with him, subtly trying to extract even crumbs of information about the woman he loved. As an exception, Videl decided to go to work not in his car. The endless traffic jams had begun to wear him out, intensifying his sense of melancholy. He didn't even realize how he was hit by the white SUV driven by some reckless girl. Like many of her fellow drivers, the lady was engrossed in something on her phone. How else could he explain that she plowed into him at a crosswalk without even bothering to slow down? He lost consciousness immediately. The impact was too strong. He came to in a hospital, briefly, still not understanding where he was. He kept drifting into a persistent darkness. But he was even glad about that. On the edge of consciousness, Celestina would appear to him, reaching out her hand, calling him to follow her. But some force held him in painful captivity. He wanted to scream, "I'm here, I'm with you, don't leave me." Yet his lips barely moved. Celestina couldn't hear him and kept disappearing into some mysterious fog. He was utterly exhausted, deciding to give up his struggle for life. He was mortally tired, the void promised him peace, and he was ready to surrender to it. The doctor was leading Celestina into the ward, explaining in a jumbled manner why her presence might be important. The patient has severely damaged his spine. He is practically paralyzed, but still doesn't understand that. He has no close relatives here except for his 12-year-old daughter. Teenagers have fragile psyches. I didn't want to burden even this not-so-little girl with that moral weight. Videl has been in a coma since yesterday. For him, this state will be a kind of salvation. We can carry out a treatment course and see if there are any positive shifts. Since last night, he stopped calling for you, but before that, he only whispered your name. The sight that greeted Celestina in the intensive care unit was horrifying. Her boss and husband were almost unrecognizable behind the various devices and tubes clinging to his body. His face was whiter than chalk. He had lost weight dramatically over just a few days, but would all of this frighten Celestina? She remembered Videl on stage with a microphone, confident, handsome, and strong. She hadn't forgotten his reaction to her advice about the deal. Therefore, she would do everything for this man to see him back in sparkling form again. Her reasoning might be naive, but so be it. The road is conquered by the one who walks. Estefan was sitting in his office, furious. Celestina has completely lost her mind. It had already been 2 weeks since she returned to the capital, and not a word from her. The staff was whispering that she was always at the hospital with the boss. And that was totally unacceptable in any family context. The man made himself a large cup of coffee and returned to the computer, but he could hardly work. Should he file for divorce now or wait? He was so tired of wandering through cafes, missing Celestina's home cooking. What was at stake? Which way should the scales tip? Towards the freedom of marriage for a man or comfort and coziness? He still hadn't made a final decision in this game. And what kind of nonsense was this? It was said that the boss, in his delirium, was calling for his wife to save him, just like in the case of the deal. Nonsense, stupidity, and absurdity. What could this wild woman do? Unthinkable. At that moment, the wild woman adjusted the blanket on the sick man. She glanced at the readings of the devices, in which she had learned a little about by now. For the 100th time, she thought about needing to step away, go home, and talk things over with her husband. She didn't want to stay under the same roof with him for another minute, but to part without a conversation seemed inhuman. Aracelia had just returned from vacation yesterday. She immediately rushed to the clinic to see her friend and pulled her out to the small hospital courtyard, chattering away. "Celestina, what's happening with you? Everyone at work is only talking about you and the boss, that you're nursing him back to health like a wife. Estefan is walking around darker than a storm cloud, everyone's practically pointing fingers at him. When did you and Videl start this romance? What did I miss?" Celestina smiled warmly. "Your colleagues are lying, making up a little fairy tale about something that never happened. Videl is still in a coma, and I'm just sitting next to him. The doctors strongly recommended that someone talk to him constantly. So here I am, running my mouth. I've already told him my entire life story from cover to cover, leaving nothing out, and recounted many of my favorite books. Thank goodness I worked for several years at our famous central library. I told him a bit about the monastery, about the Buddhist faith and its subtleties. He hasn't said a word in response. But the amazing thing is that I feel like he's talking to me mentally. I can see shadows of emotions on his face, and I can read when he likes what I'm saying and when something doesn't sit right with him. His face seems to have a life of its own, and sometimes the tips of his fingers twitch. As for the rest, Aracelia, the rumors and gossip about us, don't listen to them." Having calmed her curious friend a bit, Celestina hurried back to the ward. She couldn't explain why she clung so feverishly to this mercy towards Videl. But it seemed so persistent to her that he could hear and listen to her that she continued to chatter about everything under the sun without rest. Perhaps now in this world, there was no one who knew so much about her. 2 days later, Celestina had a difficult conversation with Estefan. He tried to convince her of something, even calling her a greedy person who had decided to invade the soul and life of a wealthier man. He insisted that only in marriage with him, a promising young specialist, could Celestina find happiness, reminding her that he had picked her up, a provincial girl, almost off the street, fed her, and sheltered her. But all his threats had no effect. Celestina barely held herself back from finally voicing all the grievances that had accumulated against her husband. She now clearly understood what role her husband, the benefactor, had chosen for her more than a year ago. She would help Videl rise and start her life anew, possibly even returning home to be closer to old Gerald. Videl felt as though he was wrapped in some soft cocoon, like cotton. He had been on a business trip once and had seen what this plant marvel looked like. It was warm and empty in the cocoon. He constantly felt the urge to sleep, but the bright sun dazzled his eyes. There were also sounds, initially resembling indistinct whispers, then slow, melodic phrases. He thought he heard someone praying over his cocoon, and suddenly everything changed. He heard her, his dream woman, Celestina. He desperately wanted to unwrap this annoying cocoon, but the oval box that contained him refused to release him into the world. Celestina's voice now constantly narrated something to him. He longed to reach her, but he lacked the strength and again resigned himself to his fate, only listening to her without fighting back. Videl regained consciousness only after 2 months in a coma. During that time, Celestina managed to obtain a divorce and move into a friend of her father's apartment. Little Alice's mother had passed away, unable to overcome her illness. Celestina was torn between the girl and Videl. She managed to be everywhere until Ramon also divorced his wife and moved into a rented apartment. Before leaving, he spoke with Celestina and told her more about their boss's fate, that Videl was a good man and, judging by everything, had fallen in love with Celestina at first sight. There was no other explanation for why he had mentioned her name in his delirium, Ramon thought. Celestina was not considering any cause and effect relationships. She selflessly continued to sit by the sick man's bedside. Now she didn't need to rush home to her husband to prepare dinner, so she had gotten into the habit of running to the nearby bakery for fluffy, soft pastries. She would bring back a bag of baked goods, a thermos of coffee, and keep watch over Videl. The doctor said that all signs indicated he would soon emerge from his unconscious state. Celestina was eager to witness that moment, and she waited for it. Videl woke up to the feeling of the cocoon around him bursting. He felt it clearly. A large room, a bright daylight lamp on the ceiling, which, it seemed, played the role of the merciless sun in his dreams. He squinted. Wires from some devices extended from his left hand. And 4-drip was monotonously doing its job above him. Awareness came quickly. A white SUV speeding towards the pedestrian crossing. The mad eyes of a woman behind the wheel. The impact. Darkness. He didn't remember anything else. But he immediately realized he was in the hospital. How long had he been lying here? An hour, a day, a week? In the far corner, someone stirred. Light footsteps approached. In a second, gray eyes, now as big as saucers, were looking at him intently. Videl. Finally, you've woken up. I'll go get the doctor right away. At that moment, Videl felt like the happiest man in the world. It was Celestina, his Celestina, the object of his dreams and fantasies. Oh God, why did he deserve such a gift? He didn't. But along with joy, unpleasant reality often intrudes into our lives. The man tried to move, but his arms and legs wouldn't respond. Panic surged through him like a dark wave. What was wrong with him? He was paralyzed. Where had Celestina gone, damn it? To keep himself in shape, Videl had exercised, gone to the swimming pool, and taken long walks around the city with his daughter, Inez. However, with his constant busyness, he rarely had time for all that. And as Inez attended a closed school outside the city, only coming home for vacations, he flinched. Did his daughter know that something had happened to him? The attending physician answered all his questions a little later. Videl, your spine has been injured. After the accident, you had multiple ruptures of internal organs. We performed all the necessary surgeries to patch you up right away. You were unconscious at the time. Recovery of motor functions is a very long process. I can't tell you exactly how favorable the prognosis is in this regard. Videl was stunned. He didn't want to become a motionless puppet, fed porridge by a sympathetic nurse. He was just over 40. His whole life was still ahead of him, and here was such a sentence. Celestina was right there in the room. All of Videl's thoughts were picked up by her like a sensitive antenna. She approached the bed and covered his hand with hers. Shoo! You need to sleep on this for a night. Let it settle. Morning is wiser than evening. What are these defeatist thoughts? We will manage. I will be here, and we'll overcome it together. Videl decided he must have misheard. Did this woman want to dedicate her time, her life, to his helplessness? He would never allow that. Better to die right away than to condemn her to such an unbearable burden. Celestina smiled at him with her warm, almost salvific smile. I didn't understand. Should I hide all the ropes and scissors in the room? You're a brave, strong man, Videl. Stop all this nonsense, for God's sake. You should be thinking about your daughter instead. Videl immediately remembered Inez. What would happen to her? If she became an orphan, her fate would be a children's home. He couldn't do that to her, even though with a father who was a disabled person, she likely wouldn't be kept either. Once again, Celestina read his mind and preempted all his questions. We consulted with Ramon. He visited you often and knows the whole situation, so he has already consulted with capable attorneys regarding civil matters. There's a way out. We will get married, and I'll put Inez under my name. The child services will have no questions about her fate. Then, when you recover, we can quietly and discreetly get divorced, and no one will know anything about why your hasty and puzzling marriage was necessary. Videl recoiled. He didn't want such a marriage with her, he wanted a real one. But how could he tell her that now? He was no longer a man, he was almost a motionless vegetable in the garden. Celestina froze. She sensed his mood and understood what he was thinking. Videl. She firmly dropped the formal address. Of course, over time, our marriage will evolve into a genuine union, if that's what you want. He couldn't believe his ears. Was she joking? Was she pitying him? He didn't need her pity, he needed her love. Celestina read that, too, and countered him immediately. If you treat your recovery seriously and strictly follow the doctor's instructions, then we'll see if I should give you my heart along with my soul. Gerald stood on the top step of the main monastery building, watching Celestina push her husband's wheelchair across the grounds of the Datsan. What a determined girl she turned out to be. She was fighting for her love with all her might. She brought Videl back to his hometown with their daughter and became the core of their family, the support for her man. Gerald liked Videl. Celestina made a worthy choice. That man deserved such devoted affection. Sometimes they talked for a long time. Videl was always worried about his company, which he had entrusted to his partner. The monk reassured him. Just don't lose your patience. The doctor said you would get back on your feet. Look, your arms are almost completely restored. You've become quite independent in many ways. Over time, your legs will be strong again. Everything around here is healing, from the air to the simple people who never hold a grudge. Sometimes, far from the comforts of civilization, the world starts to reveal itself in entirely different ways. You can do all your exercises on the machines here. Little by little, your motor functions will definitely return. Celestina has a house. You can renovate it, make it comfortable, and live like everyone else, a life close to nature and the kind heavenly rulers. Your wife can handle anything. She's a rare gem of a woman and loves you with all her heart. Celestina welcomed the conversations between the two men. She knew that her teacher was wise and noble and hoped that he would help Videl stay on the difficult path of endless, exhausting rehabilitation. They had indeed already achieved a lot in his treatment, but there was still a long way to go. Yesterday, Celestina told her husband that she wanted to have a son for him, one who resembled him, strong and loyal just like him. Videl embraced her and burst into tears. Celestina, I love you more than life itself. How wonderful it is that you didn't listen to your husband and came to the corporate party, that you were such a spontaneous girl, intervened in my conversation with my partner, and completely changed my life. It frightens me to think that none of this might have happened. I shudder at the thought that we could have been walking through this life on different paths. Celestina felt flustered. She still hadn't completely gotten used to the fact that her husband idolized her so much that he wasn't afraid to show his vulnerability beside her sometimes. She shifted the conversation to a different topic, lamenting that they hadn't been able to visit Inez at the boarding school last weekend. She expressed her astonishment once again that their daughter had adapted so quickly to her surroundings and showed no intention of returning to the capital with all its comforts. To lift his wife's spirits, Videl reminded her that they would soon be celebrating her birthday, and Aracelia and her now official husband, along with Ramon and his daughter, promised to come and visit them. They would bring news from the capital, spend some heartfelt time together, and reminisce about their shared adventures. Celestina hugged her husband tightly. She felt so good and secure with him, recalling Gerald's promise that she would definitely be happy. There was no doubt in her mind that she loved Videl very much. For some time now, she had stopped hearing and seeing his thoughts, no longer reading her beloved. But let this be the biggest disappointment in her life.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.